By contrast, these were boom years for Singer, with an ever-expanding market, fueled by their marketing policy of having Singer shops and demonstrators, as well as introducing hire purchase. The plant steadily increased its production to a peak of over 1 million machines in 1913. These were exported throughout Europe, with over a third going to Russia. The manufacturing process was streamlined and highly specialized. Each job had a different piece rate calculated on how long each process was supposed to take. In practice, this could be very unfair, as each job had its own particular variables. In 1911, attempts by the American management to reduce staff and effectively increase the workload while reducing wages led to a strike. Started by women in the needle department, it soon spread throughout the factory. However, there were no unions, and the first signs of the strength of the multinational employer were seen as Singer switched production to its American plant. The strike collapsed, though Singer soon appointed a Scottish manager and became known as a good payer. A paternalistic, if highly disciplinarian, approach to management developed, and a two-way loyalty between management and workforce was established.
They did have all sorts of organizations within the factory, so that you had debating societies and photographic clubs and all sorts of sports clubs, and they had Singer galas in which the whole town joined in which a Singer queen was crowned. If your father had worked there, you were much more likely to get a job there. If he had a word with his manager and said, well, I've got a son or daughter, who wants to come in. So it was, the loyalties were very much to Singer and through the family.
With growing unrest in Europe, naval orders flowed into Clydebank and launches doubled. Both John Brown's and Beardmore's prospered. The eventual outbreak of war drew a lot of shipyard workers away as volunteers. However, John Brown's was made an Admiralty-controlled yard and had the pick of workers from other yards. Even so, they were short-handed and began to employ semi-skilled and unskilled men and women to do jobs normally done by time-served craftsmen. This process, known as dilution, angered the trade unions, who were much better organized in the shipyards. In 1916, Beardmore's insistence on greater dilution caused a strike. Eventually, Lloyd George's government declared Dalmuir a controlled institution, and leading shop stewards like Davy Kirkwood were arrested and deported to Edinburgh. Despite this, the contribution Clydebank made to the war effort was tremendous. John Brown's produced a destroyer a month, as well as great cruisers like HMS Hood. Meanwhile, as part of the expansion of the whole Beardmore Empire, Dalmuir diversified greatly to produce not only ships, but tanks, gun mountings, shells, aeroplanes, engines and components for all of these, and even airships. With the new workers moving into Clydebank and Dalmuir, the borough's population had continued to grow during the war. Beardmore's and John Brown's provided new housing, and the borough's boundaries were again increased in 1925. But adequate housing was always to be a problem in a town which had grown at the rate Clydebank did. Overcrowding and lack of repairs led to the bitter disputes over rent common to many industrial areas in the First World War, until the government froze rents at the 1914 level. However, the rent increases of 1920, at a time when unemployment was rising, caused great resentment. Women in the Holy City jeered and obstructed the first attempts of factors' clerks to collect the increased rents. By 1921, 4,000 people had joined the Clydebank Housing Association, set up to campaign for tenants' rights. Under the guidance of Andrew Leiper and David D. Cormack, the CHA fought an incredibly successful legal war against the landlords, finding a series of loopholes in the legal procedures. The landlords took a test case right through the courts, but in November 1922, even the House of Lords upheld the CHA's position. By 1924, new legislation had been brought in to close up the loopholes, and with 60% of Clydebank tenants in arrears, the factors and landlords embarked on a policy of mass eviction. This was again vigorously opposed by the CHA, and vigilante groups of men and women rushed to the scene of any eviction. Even so, by 1926, many families were on the streets, and the town council had to provide tents and railway carriages as temporary accommodation. The expectations of great prosperity and better living conditions after the First World War were not realised. At the end of the war, Lord Weir described William Beardmore as a field marshal of industry and added,
"It was sufficient for Sir William to know that the country needed something, and he felt he could make it. He made his plans, he produced what was wanted, he went ahead and did the work. And when it was done, it was early enough then to talk about finance."
This was unfortunately very true, and Beardmore, created Lord Invernairn of Strathnairn in 1921, had failed to realise the extent to which he had overstretched his capacity in the war, nor did he realise how short the post-war boom would be. To make use of the great production capabilities of Parkhead and Dalmuir, he continued to diversify into everything from airships like the R-34, which crossed the Atlantic, planes like the Wee Bee and the Inverness flying boat, to locomotives, cars and taxis. Sadly, Beardmore was ahead of his time in his belief that transport's the thing. The Depression was here to stay. The airship and aeroplane department at Dalmuir were closed in 1921. As far as shipbuilding was concerned, the writing was also on the wall when Britain and America signed the Washington Treaty, limiting the respective size of their navies, and all prospects of the shipbuilding boom continuing vanished, along with orders for new battle cruisers, placed with both Beardmore's and John Brown's. A further blow for Dalmuir came in 1925, when the Italian Lloyd Sabaudo line, one of the few shipping lines Beardmore did have connections with, was forbidden by Mussolini to place orders outside Italy. By 1928, the whole Beardmore organisation was on the edge of collapse. Lord Invernairn lost overall control of his company when the Bank of England stepped in. Their main objective was to secure the future of the Parkhead Forge. In 1930, the Dalmuir shipyard was closed, as was the locomotive department. In 1934, the marine engine works closed. Partly to offset public opinion, diesel engines were built at Dalmuir until 1936, the year Lord Invernairn died, after which only a spares and maintenance operation remained at Dalmuir. Ironically, the great naval shipyard was later used by Arnott Young, the ship breakers. John Brown's had also eagerly awaited the boom in building ships to replace the tonnage lost in the 5 years of war. They had already arranged long-term orders and agreements with several major shipping lines, including Cunard and Canadian Pacific. Besides this, they were also in a much better financial position than Beardmore's, as they had not had such huge capital outlays and still had substantial cash reserves. Even so, to cope with the great rush of merchant work, they invested over £300,000. Unfortunately, no one was immune to the great slump in world economics or to the effects of inflation, and work on existing contracts was slowed down or stopped. The workforce dwindled from over 9,000 in 1920 to just over 3,500 in 1922. The next 6 years saw just 23 contracts come to Clydebank and an overall loss of £200,000. Most of the liners built in these years were for the emigrant trade to America and Canada, but this virtually came to an end with new US restrictions on immigration. By 1930, all 8 berths were empty, and there were no orders in the books. The position was even more serious than it appeared, as the parent company in Sheffield was virtually bankrupt. Sir Thomas Bell, the much-respected managing director of the Clydebank yard for over 20 years, calculated that Clydebank had supported Sheffield to the tune of over £1.5 million. There was one chance left for Clydebank. Cunard had let it be known that they were planning to run a weekly service from London via Cherbourg to New York with just 2 ships. To accomplish this, they would have to be both extremely large and extremely fast.
The then chairman of the Cunard, Sir Percy Bates, stated on several occasions that the ship was not designed to be a record breaker. It was designed to provide this service a ship each way once a week. And the ship was no larger or no more powerful or no faster than was necessary for that service. And that was true. It was, but it so happened we broke the record in the course of doing that.
Clydebank had to tender for the contract, along with several other yards. However, their long-standing connection with Cunard and their technical expertise gave them a good chance.
When the two of us started on the very early plans, when it was purely a consultative exercise, we had no contract, we were doing it as consultants to Cunard at that time because they relied on our experience from building previous ships for them. And at that stage it was very much a secret business. We were locked away in a back room and kept very much on our own. And of course you come to the stage when it's got to go into the drawing office for general development, and well, it's not a secret any longer.
The design work impressed Cunard, and the order saved Clydebank. Work began on ship number 534 in the autumn of 1930. However, the chaotic state of the world economy forced Cunard and John Brown's to stop work on the 12th of December 1931, and all but the office staff and enough men to maintain the yard and the great hull of the 534 were laid off.
Oh, it was devastating, devastating. My own family, for instance, we had two older brothers who were, one was an apprentice, one was a young journeyman, and they were paid off, and after a wee while money got very scarce and people got down the dumps. Even your mother used to be worried, often seen her crying, because they were very fierce with the means testing.
The unfinished hull cast a shadow of despair over the town. It seemed to symbolise all the ills of the nation.
There's no doubt it was an extremely severe time for all the people in Clydebank. And I don't know whether the outside world appreciated it always, but there it was.
Among the leaders in the campaign to restart work on the 534 were Sir Thomas Bell and Davy Kirkwood, the former Beardmore shop steward and local Labour MP since 1922.
It's quite interesting that two people as dissimilar as Davy Kirkwood and Sir Thomas Bell did combine and work together for this restoration or resumption of the work on the ship.
The 534 was finally restarted in April 1934, once the government had accepted the report of Lord Weir, and Cunard and the White Star Line merged. In September, the great ship was launched as the Queen Mary, by the Queen herself, accompanied by George V. The Clyde had been specially widened and deepened, but even so, the Queen Mary was launched right into the mouth of the cart. The shadow of the Depression seemed to have lifted. The contract for the sister ship to the Queen Mary followed in 1936, along with several new naval orders. While the work was welcome, the increasing prospect of another war was not.